President, members of the legislature, I have in my hand a $20 bill minted by the United States of America. Do you know what this $20 bill represents? A portion of the amount delivered to me by the state as a part of reimbursement for my legislative expenses. Had I followed what the Attorney General stated, we would not have expenses because the Attorney General said it was unconstitutional. We have to use our judgment, we have to use our minds, and I'm not satisfied that a person in the Attorney General's office is better able to speculate about how a court might react to a law than I am. I've won cases in the Nebraska Supreme Court before, arguing them myself, briefing them myself. And I won cases that people said nobody could win. I've won cases against radar, VASCAR, airplane clocks and speeds. In fact, Mr. Conboy, who is a city prosecutor from Omaha, attends various meetings at the national level for prosecutors. And one of the questions he invariably receives, who is this Chambers fellow who seems to have cornered the market on traffic cases in your Supreme Court, and he wins them? This bill is not precisely like any of the bills that the Attorney General's opinion mentioned. I do not think that it is unconstitutional. The first part of the bill amends the Political Accountability Act, which already says that if a message of this kind comes into your home and the person who makes an expenditure which is reportable is responsible, then there's certain information that has to be given. That's already the law. In that portion of the law that is being amended, the time during which these calls can come will be found. When we get to page 3, which is across the street from page 2, we have the material which must be stated along with the message. I do not believe that political speech of this kind is on the same level as a political discussion among citizens or when they are approaching their elected representatives. This is in the nature of advertising a position. A person's home is not a freeway. A person's telephone is not a taxi cab, meaning it must accept every fare or every call. But because there are people who have access to a person's home through the telephone and access to the telephone, I think there is a compelling state interest in assuring citizens that their right to privacy is not going to be infringed simply because they make use of a telephone in their home, which now is deemed a necessity. I believe that the bill is narrowly drawn in the sense of not doing anything more than is necessary to address the evil that exists, which we are trying to remedy. I just don't feel, I do not believe, I am not convinced that one person's opinion in the Attorney General's office should cause this legislature to derail a bill and not enact it into law. The issue is one which is appropriate for a court to determine. We should do our job as the legislature and enact this law. Then if somebody wants to challenge it, place it before the Nebraska Supreme Court. Let us get a judicial determination of whether or not this bill falls within the realm of what we constitutionally may do. And I'm not persuaded that we should let an opinion from a person in the Attorney General's office trump what it is we intend to do in the legislature. Thank you, Mr. President.
In your opinion, this bill, as drafted on final reading, is constitutional?
Well, I can't say that, Senator Fulton. It takes a court to do that, but I believe that it will withstand a legal challenge. What the court will do will be determined when the court does it. If I thought the bill were unconstitutional as drafted, I would have made recommendations to Senator Shemek.
Okay. Are there, the Attorney General's opinion was in response to a specific question that Senator Nelson brought forward about limiting the number of bills. Were you able to glean from the AG's opinion, I guess, did the Attorney General's opinion address that question with specificity to your liking?
Nothing that I read in the Attorney General's opinion convinces me that anything in the bill is unconstitutional. As to the number of calls, I don't know whether the Attorney General concluded that 16 calls or 16,000 calls would have to be allowed. So I didn't get anything from that opinion which would really give us direction. There might have been something there, but I just didn't pick it up.
Okay. Thank you, Senator Chambers.
Legislature, words are very important when we are parsing a statement for the purpose of political, but especially legal analysis. I know that the Attorney General's letter referred to political content. What the Attorney General and even courts that they quoted should have said, in order to be more precise, was a type of call rather than the content. This bill does not discuss the content of the call. It does not say you cannot refer to your opponent as a no-good, lying thief who deserves to be in the penitentiary. We don't say that. It doesn't say you can't insult somebody. It doesn't say you can't use profanity, obscenity. It does not deal with the content. It deals with a type or a category of call. The problem that this bill is designed to address has been established factually as occurring in the political arena. Concrete examples have been given. The Public Service Commission even had investigated some complaints. So the nature of the evil and its existence are not open to question. Those things have been established. So the next question, as I look at it, is whether or not the state, in the interest of protecting its citizens' basic right to privacy, can it, in the exercise of its police powers, enact a law that would restrict the time during which such calls can be made and restrict the number of them? What is the purpose of the call? It is, based on what has been established from the complaints, a repetition of the same thing over and over and over. So it's not like even a matter where you have, like the Burma Shave advertisements on the highway, where the first one gives you part of the message, the next one gives you the other part of the message, and then you wind up through a series of calls getting a complete message. If there were too many calls achieving that purpose, I think the state would have the right to step in and limit. The state is not prohibiting these calls. When Senator White mentioned the right of Paul Revere, some think that William Dawes was the one who was really more responsible for spreading the alarm. So instead of the poem starting, "Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere," they might have said, "Listen, my children, while I pause and tell you the tale of William Dawes." It depends on the approach that you're going to take. But we are not limiting how much and when these politicians and the people conveying the message can be out on the public highways saying what they want to say. But I'm sure if somebody had a loudspeaker on a car at midnight driving through the neighborhood speaking for a candidate or a political issue on the ballot, that there are criminal sanctions that can be invoked to stop that speech entirely. Entirely. Even the First Amendment as
1
everybody
minute.
knows, does not lay down an absolute right to speak and say anything you want to, any way you please, under all circumstances. They say you cannot yell fire in a crowded theater, but in fact you can. If you have a play and an individual is going to be shot for treason, then the person says, ready, aim, fire, in a loaded theater, and it's not against the law. And somebody can holler fire if in fact there is a fire. So when you make these statements, they are not absolute. You can find exceptions to all of them. I will acknowledge that we're in an area where there can be a considerable amount of grayness. But there are some of us who believe this bill is unconstitutional, others who believe it is not. Our belief is not going to ultimately determine the issue. A court, even if it hands down an opinion, a decision with which I disagree,
Time.
is going to ultimately decide. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Chambers.
Members of the legislature, I will say it for the first time, and if I have said it before, then I'm going to repeat it. We are all speculating as to what a court might do. None of the cases was on all fours with what this bill has to say. Courts are notorious for distinguishing one case from another case, one case from a line of cases, because it thinks that under the circumstances, a particular approach is the right one to take. The Nebraska Supreme Court has said numerous times that whereas we will note the decisions and opinions of our sister courts, it is our responsibility to determine what is in the best interest of the citizens of Nebraska. Now, Senator Erdman and the Attorney General talked about decisions handed down by the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals at the federal level, suggesting that if this matter is challenged, it would be in the federal court. But they cannot say how the 8th Circuit or even a federal trial court will decide on the constitutionality or lack thereof of this bill. Never have I been prepared to forego what we as a legislature should do based on an opinion of somebody in the executive department. The governor has made it clear, although I don't believe him, that if he doesn't get what he and the superintendents want on the school bill, he'll veto every bill that we send over there. Well, let him. He can veto mine. I've always said that. I don't care. It shows more about him than me. But threats come from the executive department. Sometimes a politician has a political agenda. The Attorney General is running full bore, less about 1 percentage point, for the U.S. Senate. And maybe it would be to his advantage to be able to make a lot of robocalls. This opinion was rendered in a political setting, not just in the sense of anything that comes through the legislature involves a political process, but I mean political in the sense of perhaps partaking of partisanship. Senator Erdman cannot say with certitude what the court will do. The Attorney General will never say that when an opinion is rendered. The Attorney General stopped several years ago saying that this bill, if enacted into law, will be unconstitutional. First of all, his office was often wrong. Secondly, it was going beyond what the role of an opinion from the Attorney General's office should be. So there will be the argument, the speculation, then the inconclusive conclusion that a court may do this, a court may do that. But it's up to the legislature to make a decision. These issues were touched on during the earlier debate, or they could have been. I was trying to restrict the time frame so that between the hours of 4 and 6, when people might be eating dinner, none of these calls could be made. But I withdrew that amendment. It is aimed at a particular problem that has been shown to exist. And I'm sure if the matter came before a court, the defender of this law, and it wouldn't be the Attorney General.
1 minute.
The Attorney General would be compelled to hire outside counsel, having already taken a public position against the bill. The facts would be presented to establish why the bill was enacted. There would be a laying out of these types of calls, when they're made, and all of that. The bill is aimed at that particular problem. It does not prohibit political speech. It does not prohibit these types of calls. It regulates the time during which such calls can be made. It limits the number of calls to 2. Some people are saying, suppose the court said, well, why don't you regulate commercial speech? We don't have to do everything that can be done every time we enact a bill. Senator Persh had stated what I've mentioned to some of my colleagues on the floor.
Time.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I was going to mention that Senator Persh said something on the mic that I've been saying to some of my colleagues, namely that it wouldn't be appropriate to extend the scope of this bill. There has been no discussion of any additional inclusiveness in terms of reaching out and pulling in other entities. This is final reading, and there has been no hearing on the extension of this bill. That in and of itself, it being final reading I'm talking about, is not an argument against adopting a substantive amendment on final reading. Since we're in the tail end of the session, we may see that happening. But when we're dealing in the realm of speech and governmental regulation of speech, we should not willy-nilly, helter-skelter, ad hocly put a bill in place that would reach out and include other areas of speech to be regulated without having given thorough consideration. I'm going to support this bill. I cannot guarantee that a court would uphold it as being constitutional. Nobody can say with certitude that a court will strike it down. The issue is serious. It is one on which we are entitled to have a definitive answer. The only institution in this society which can give us that answer is a court. If the trial court ruled one way and nobody appealed it, that would be the definitive answer. If it were appealed to the Eighth Circuit and whatever opinion was given there, decision was rendered. If it were not appealed, that would be the answer. If, on the other hand, it's sent to the U.S. Supreme Court and that court takes it up, that would be the final answer. But if the U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear the case, then whatever the appellate court had said would be the final word as far as this bill that we're talking about. I believe that considerable thought has gone into the issue itself. I don't know of another way, less restrictive than this, which could address the problem. As Senator Shimmick said, you could put in place a do not call list and a number of other things that have been suggested at the federal level and in some states to restrict unwanted calls. I start from the position of the right of the citizen to be free from this kind of intrusiveness into his or her castle. How far a court would go in applying that concept where this bill would be concerned is something that I can only speculate about. But I do believe we ought to enact this bill into law and then let one of the political parties challenge it. I don't know of a citizen who's going to be offended that we pass this bill. Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, Senator Peterson, and I will not use all of that time. I think we're reaching the point where what needs to be said, what has been desired to be said has been said. I'm going to support this bill. If there comes a challenge, let it come. If this were a clear-cut issue, one way or the other, I would be one of those saying, there's no way that it can be held up when we look at it rationally, no way that it can be upheld. But even those speaking against it cannot say with certainty that a court will strike this bill down. I'd like to ask Senator Nelson a question, and I don't mean Senator Hansen or Senator Carlson, but Senator Nelson.
Senator Nelson, would you yield to a question?
Senator Nelson is happy to yield.
Senator Nelson, having read the Attorney General's opinion, listened to the discussion, and having your own views on this, could you say with certainty that a court will strike this bill down as unconstitutional if it's enacted into law?
No, I think what you and others have to say is there's a great deal of uncertainty here. We can't say with certainty what the court would do.
Do you want to say more?
It would be using up your time, Senator.
I know how to say cease. Go ahead.
I'm just sitting here listening, and I'm thinking of my own position as a political candidate in the future. Do I really want to be restricted to making 2 robocalls a day if I think that maybe 3 or 4 might get the job done in winning the election? And I look at the other side of it. What are we trying to prevent here? We're trying to prevent abuse of robocalls, and we find, as a result of a World Herald article, that we can't find out who's doing it anyway. And so what's the point? And I'm not going to say that a court would say this, but they might ask the same question. Are you hitting something with a hammer here that you can't hit and you can't prevent in any event?
Senator Nelson, if somebody were to fire a weapon from a location inhabited by nobody and you couldn't find out who fired the weapon, should you then make the firing of a weapon under those circumstances legal? In other words, you as a lawyer know the difference between an issue of proof and other issues. So maybe you cannot find in all cases who did this, but that doesn't mean necessarily that you allow that conduct to be unregulated. Would you agree with that statement as far as it goes?
As far as it goes, yes, I would, Senator.
Thank you, and that's all I will ask Senator Nelson, because I said I wouldn't take the full 5 minutes. And I'm saying for myself, again, I cannot predict with certitude what a court will do, but the issue is such an important one that I think a court should make that decision if somebody chooses to make the challenge. Thank you, Mr. President.
31 A's, 7 A's, 10 present, not voting, 1 excused, not voting, Mr. President.
LB 198 does pass.
Chambers, you're recognized to open on floor amendment 75.
Mr. President, members of the legislature, I'm going to be withdrawing some of my amendments. Some of them will be incorporated into an amendment that Senator Avery will offer, but a couple of them I intend to take up, and this is one of them. On page 7, lines 16 and 17, I will reinstate the following words. In determining whether state assistance is in the best interest of the state, the board shall consider, that would be in quotes, then I go on, and in lines 19 and 20 reinstate, the fiscal and economic capacity of the applicant to finance the local share of the eligible facility. What I'm trying to put back into the law is a requirement that when the board is determining whether state assistance will be available, the applicant must establish its ability to finance the local share of the eligible facility. So you have a facility, there would be a state share, a local share. The applicant would have to be able to establish that the local share can be financed. I don't know why that was to be taken out of the bill, the law, but I would like to hear that explained. And if I can be shown a compelling reason why an applicant should not be required to show that financing is available, I want to know why. And that's all I will say at this point, Mr. President. I will listen carefully. Perhaps I can be persuaded. Thank you.
If Senator Chambers is here. If not,
Senator Chambers, would you yield to a question?
okay. Senator, I've been reading some of the amendments. I'm going to ask you what I call basically a pretty simple question. The stadium is an issue.
Say it again.
The stadium is an issue, or a
for
stadium.
sure.
If that concept would be totally removed, would this cause you to be in favor, or at least getting closer to saying this bill has
What would
potential?
help is if we eliminated stadium, if when we're talking about a sport arena, we're talking about an enclosed facility.
Yes.
And then some of the other amendments that I've offered, like the one we're considering now, where the local has to prove that it can finance its share.
Okay. Okay. So
Then get some money for the poor people of the parts of Omaha that have always been ignored. Then I will look with less disfavor on the bill.
okay. So it seems to me, as I read the transcript of the last discussion we had on this bill, a lot of the times when the new senators or who were not here in 1999, and we said, well, that was the past, and let's move forward, your comment was, hey, guys, you don't know what was going on. You're being sort of hoodwinked. So I'm trying to find, personally, a solution that would make us smarter for future decision-making, but also some things that would move this bill along. To me, eliminating something such as a stadium and enclosed has merit. I mean, I like what you're saying. And to help people in need, I have no problem with that. So I think we're in good shape. Would you agree?
If we can take it a step at a time and I can convince the body to adopt the amendments that I'm talking about, as I say, it will reduce considerably my opposition to the bill.
Okay. So as we go through those individual amendments, if I am in agreement and the majority of the body is in agreement, it does seem like we could move forward on this. I'm just being honest with you.
The heat of my opposition diminishes with each amendment that's adopted, and the chill against the bill reduces proportionately also.
Okay. Last night I could have sure really used some of that chill because it was hot here last night. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. President, members of the legislature, the only thing my amendment does is to restore language that is being removed from the present law by this bill. The language that I would restore says that the local applicant must be able to establish to the board that they can finance the local end of this deal. I don't know why they were going to remove that from the law, but I think it ought to be retained, and that's all my amendment does. So I'm asking that you support it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
31 ayes, no nays, Mr. President, on the adoption of Senator Chambers' amendment.
The amendment is adopted. Mr. Clerk, next motion.
Senator Chambers, floor amendment 76.
Thank you. Mr. President, members of the legislature, although Senator Avery has what could be considered a somewhat comprehensive amendment that may include some of what I'm offering, I think I'm going to take mine up individually, see if I can get them, and then my amendments won't become embroiled in any of the discussions that are going on about Senator Avery's amendment, discussions both in the chamber and outside the chamber to which I'm not privy and which I don't intend to get involved in too deeply. But the amendments I'm offering are going to be very simple, straightforward, easy to understand, and they can be voted up or down. I assure you that they're not designed to simply take time, because I could do it that much easier than the course I'm pursuing here. So on page 5 in line 20, I would strike the word stadiums. The Quest Center which supposedly is what this bill is about primarily, has nothing to do with stadiums. There is a lot of discussion in Omaha right now about building a new stadium somewhere around the area of the Quest Center to ensure that this bill does not fly a false flag. I want to strike the word stadiums from the bill, and that's all this amendment does. If you have questions, I will answer them, but aside from that, I don't intend to discuss the amendment further, but I will close. Thank you, Mr. President.
To a question.
Yes, I will.
Senator Chambers, is your understanding that the Quest Center Arena would never be qualified as termed a stadium?
Say it again.
Would you never concern yourself with saying that the Quest Center or a facility of that type could be called a stadium?
Right.
A stadium would be an outdoor facility, and an arena would be a closed facility?
Yes.
Okay, that's all I want to know. Thank you, Mr. President.
Record, please, Mr. Clerk.
29 ayes, no nays, Mr. President, on the adoption of Senator Chambers' amendment.
The amendment is adopted.
Mr. President, the next amendment I have, Senator Chambers, Floor Amendment 78.
Senator Chambers, you are recognized to open on FA 78.
Thank you. Mr. President, members of the legislature, this amendment to some extent complements COMPLE-MENTS, the one we just adopted. In line 19 on page 5, we have this language: sports arena facility means any real or personal property used for observing and so forth. What I would do on line 19, after the word any, insert the word enclosed. An arena is enclosed. I do not want this language that I'm dealing with to undo what we just adopted. The language we just adopted said that stadiums are not a part of what this bill is about. The arena facility at the Quest Center is enclosed. Because I just am distrustful of people in Omaha, I'm going to let you know I really am. I have stated before that when we are legislating and we have the opportunity to put into the legislation what we mean, that's what we ought to do. An arena is an enclosed area. What this amendment would cause the language on line 19 to say is the following: sports arena facility means any enclosed real or personal property used for observing and so forth. All I'm doing is inserting that word enclosed for the reason that I gave, and in case you missed it in my involved discussion, an arena is an enclosed facility. So maybe included in the understanding of the term arena is the fact that it's enclosed, but I want to state it so that it's crystal clear what this bill is dealing with. Thank you, Mr. President. Legislature, Senator Whiteman and I had a discussion off the mic as to where this word enclosed ought to be. I wanted to disrupt as little as possible the language that the drafters put into this bill. So what I wanted to make clear from the discussion is that the arena area is going to be enclosed. It is not a stadium, and I felt that the best place to put it would be after the any. It would say any closed real or personal property used for observing competitive sports. And since you're going to be in this facility for the of observing competitive sports, and then you have the dressing room, locker facilities, and so forth, I think it would be clear that you're not talking a parking lot or the environs, but this location, which is enclosed, used for the purpose of competitive sports and the observing of the competitive sports. So I inserted the word in the spot that I did, and I believe the discussion will make it clear what it is referring to. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Chambers. Members, you have heard the closing on F. Record, please, Mr. Clerk.
26 ayes, no nays on the adoption of Senator Chambers' amendment.
FA 78 is adopted.
Mr. President, Senator Chambers offers floor amendment 79.
Senator Chambers, you are recognized to open on floor amendment 79.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the legislature, as you can see, my amendments are very simple. What I would do still on page 5, in line 22, after the word "and," I would insert the two words "on site," and it's hyphenated. This language relates to the sports arena facility, and it says that it would include administrative offices in connection with operating the facilities. Administrative offices could be located anywhere. If the intent is that the administrative offices be located with the facility, my language only clarifies and underlines that point. If the intent is to have off-site administrative offices, then I think that should be stated differently from the way it is here. I believe that these administrative offices should be on site to be included in this definition. So that's what I'm offering, and I'll answer any questions that you have. Thank you, Mr. President.
Record, please, Mr. Clerk.
28 ayes, no nays on adoption of the amendment, Mr. President.
Floor amendment 79 is adopted.
Senator Chambers would move to amend with floor amendment 80.
Senator Chambers, you are recognized to open on FA 80.
Thank you. Mr. President, members of the legislature, Senator Whiteman stated that things are so agreeable around here that some of the fun is gone, but it's also moving so rapidly that I have to reacquaint myself with what these amendments are doing, because some of them I may withdraw. So I'm going to take a second to reorient myself on this amendment. But it would be found on page 9 in line 22. And before I tell you what it does, I want to be sure that it does what I had in mind. What I would do is strike from line 22 the words, "It is the intent of the legislature that the." I would strike that which says intent. Then I would insert the with a capital T, and it would say simply the remaining 30%. It doesn't change anything substantively. It simply removes the language that says it is the intent of the legislature, and instead just makes a declaratory sentence that the remaining 30% of state sales tax revenue collected and so forth. So we simply make the statement, for example, well, I don't think I can make it any clearer than that. If there are questions, I will answer them. Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, I will.
The amendments would strike line 22. It is the intent of the legislature that that will be stricken, correct?
Yes.
So then we would be picking up with. I don't know that I disagree with what you're trying to do.
Then we would put the in front of remaining, but with a capital T to show we're starting a new sentence.
Okay, so this would be in line, we would be reinserting in line 22, correct?
We would, the word the in line 22 begins with a lowercase t.
Okay, understood.
Okay, so I have to strike that version of the, and replace it with an uppercase the.
So you're making this a statement exclaiming as opposed to expressing intent.
Yes, and then in line 24, so that the sentence will be complete, after the word facilities, the word shall is inserted, and here's what it would read. The remaining 30% of state sales tax revenue collected by retailers doing business at such facilities shall be appropriated.
Okay, thank you, Senator Chambers.
25 ayes, no nays on adoption of the amendment, Mr. President.
The legislature, I'm going to try to get rid of some bunglesome language with this amendment. This is a definition of a hotel facility. Here is what the current language says for the sake of the record, beginning in line 20 on page 4. Hotel facility means any facility located within 200 yards of a convention and meeting center facility or a sports arena facility in which the public may, for consideration, obtain sleeping accommodations. It could mean that you get the sleeping accommodations in the sports arena facility, and that's not what is intended. The intent is that you get the sleeping accommodations in the hotel facility. So, in line 20, after the word facility, I strike everything through line 23. And this is what I insert. In which the public may, for a consideration, obtain sleeping accommodations, and which is located within 200 yards of a convention and meeting center facility or a sports arena facility. What I'm doing in defining hotel facility is to group together the words that define this facility first, that you can get the sleeping accommodations there. Then we add the language that specifies how near it must be located to one of these convention centers or sports arenas. You can read the language for yourself, and you'll see that it is much more syntactically correct, and it clarifies. I think I've spoken long enough, and I think I've made the point, so that's all I will say at this point, Mr. President. Thank you.
Record, please, Mr. Clerk.
29 ayes, no nays, Mr. President, on the adoption of Senator Chambers' amendment.
Floor Amendment 81 is adopted. You are recognized.
Mr. President, members of the legislature, this bill started out, strike that. A man named Robert Louis Stevenson wrote a story titled Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Dr. Jekyll had certain experiments because he wanted to separate the bad from a person's nature from the good. It's a moral play. So Dr. Jekyll put together his various compounds, and when he drank it, there was a change in him. He became Hyde. Edward Hyde, very strange looking, and when Dr. Jekyll became, naturally were too large. Mr. Hyde began to do very terrible things. Mr. Hyde was aware of Dr. Jekyll. Dr. Jekyll became aware of Mr. Hyde. Struggle developed between them. Dr. Jekyll became very distressed about what he had done because Mr. Hyde had a taste for human blood. He killed people. He did a lot of wicked things, like the typical point was reached where Dr. Jekyll, by an act of will, returned to Mr. Hyde. When Dr. Jekyll knew that Edward Hyde was much better at handling these situations, he was innovative, he was cunning. To make a long story short, you ought to read and see how it turned out. But in those days, righteousness always had to be rewarded Wickedness always had to be punished, but Dr. Jekyll himself did not survive. And you need to read the story to see why. This started out, in my opinion, as Mr. Hyde from the beginning. We say, and the wolf man, if the wolf man is worse than Mr. Hyde. Let me, you have a horse with a little jockey, and that's the way horse races are run. Now you have a little horse with a great big jockey on it. From what Senator Fisher told us, the state of the bill now is 3 times as monstrous as it was at first. From 2 million, and that little horse is just struggling. You all are going to have to decide a good thing for the state, area of the city that I'm concerned about, not by increasing the amount, that by taking some of what Omaha is going to get from the bill. Texas, the area of Omaha, which always has been ignored, should get something out of it, and it will. But the facts remain the facts.
1 minute.
To shrink the tax base of the state. It's a good thing, you'll support it. If you think it is a bad thing, you won't. The form was bad. The bill form is worse. I say this, if the area of the city where the people live, about whom I'm concerned, would get something out of this bill. There are issues transcendent and that people need to think deeply about. If you obligate the state to do something, then it has been paying through the nose
Time.
who prevailed on the state. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Chambers, you are next to speak.
These corporations which have prevailed them tax breaks. You know why there's a problem in the inner city of Omaha now when it comes to adequate funding for the schools? Down here fighting against those sales tax breaks, income tax breaks, property tax breaks, all kind of breaks for the corporations. They were able to erect huge, impressive, and people who weren't aware of what the state had given away will look at those buildings and say, there should be a large enough tax base there to fund the schools, but you gave it away. Didn't say anything. The mayors went along with it, the county board, everybody, and I fought against it, and naturally I lost. And they're being born to this. The state took on obligations, and the ones who originally were here, other than myself, need to think deeply about what it is you're undertaking to do. I didn't think Senator Avery's bill, his amendment, did from his amendment or extracted and got them added individually. The law is very, very busy and effective. And there will come a question. We got 10 days left about this plan, that plan, group that needs help, that group which needs help. And you can think back to what you're doing here. I fought hard against LB 305. Fight it. To what extent, I really can't say now. And 305A. But you all need to start thinking about some of these other bills, because I'm not going to do all of your work for you. I'll be whining. Some of you are thinking of bills now that carry an A bill, and you may not get what you want. And you'll stand up here and try to persuade people to want them to vote. You have to show them that, but you gave $10 million away for training with the assist committee. And one of the companies gouged the public for over $300 million, and you all gave them $360,000 for training. Just throwing money at them, just throwing the money away. And then you insist, well, this is for economic development. That is the abracadabra. Just hook economic development, but you need to think. Act in haste, repent at leisure. You have I have not liked LB 551. 551, although I signed on to an amendment.
1
that I
minute.
understand was- And you all are going to say, I bet. That's not true. Look at the one in the condition that it's in. About the state, you didn't think about the need of a tax base for the state to have. Somebody told me that gas in Omaha is $3 and almost 50 cents for a gallon. And people are crying. I used to full, whatever you call those little places at the pump. Now, they're like nation, except the people in those little huts where they sell, understand that now they're eating the food so they won't starve. Thank you.
Chambers. Next, and this is your third time on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. If you insist, I shall speak again. How will you vote? 10 years from now it won't make any difference because you won't be here. The state can go to Hades in a handbasket and you won't care because you don't care about that while you are here. Think. What have you got a brain for? What have you got a conscience for? You know, there are people who masquerade as liberals before they got in the legislature and they got here, and now they're as conservative as anything you find because there's a certain group they want to run around with, want to rub elbows with, be partners with. And all that stuff they talked about in terms of advocating for the poor, advocating for the marginalized, all that's out the window now. They are just like this legislature. This legislature is them. These are their people. And what they really have been all the time. Now, they had to put on a front to get a job. And they misled people. And at the time, when we need a principled position, we don't take it. The word state senator flows very the tongue and out of the mouth. I have a stake in the bill, but not an S-T-E-A-K, meaning that I'm going to feed my ego. I'm going to forget my primary duty and responsibility as a state senator. If the bill passes, will I make sure that the money goes to North Omaha that's in the bill? I certainly shall, because I'm a pragmatist. But right now, we're in a position to do that which is right. We ought to ask for a roll call vote. And those who are for this bill, instead of saying aye, you should say guilty, guilty, guilty. Senator Adams, guilty. Senator Aguilar, absent. Senator Ashford, guilty. Senator Avery, guilty, guilty, guilty. And that is the way it's going to go right down the board. And then when we get to those bitter days that I know are going to come, I know they're going to come. And some of you all who've been around here long enough know it also, but you push that out of your mind because it's not happening today, right this minute. Is this bill going to help the state of Nebraska? You're going to reduce the state's tax base, and thereby you help the state. Is that your reasoning and your logic? Senator Mines pointed out how Senator, the head of the Appropriations Committee, Senator Hiding Man, how Senator Hiding Man has decided on a bill that will give some sales tax exemption. But when he's on his hobby horse for the committee, oh, I'm not for that. We can't have that. Look at this and look at that and look at the other. But don't look at what I got in my back pocket, because it contradicts everything coming out of my mouth. I'm not like y'all. I don't have to remember what I said this morning, because I'm going to say basically the same thing. My principles are not like the dime store or the supermarket, where whatever the traffic will bear is what I do and what I provide. You all are marking yourselves. You know what each other is. You know how far you can trust each other and how much you can't trust each other. But we shall see what we shall see. However the vote turns out today does not mark the end of the story. 10 days left. That's not even the length of a special session. If you all want to get on the wrong side of me, and I'm not going to tell you that this bill will do it, get on the wrong side of me. Y'all get tired of staying here till midnight before I will. You be telling Senator Flood, I can't stay here that late. But you will if you're going to try to beat me. And I don't know if 10 days, 12 hours a day is enough time. Because y'all will get tired, y'all will get weak, and the lobby will beat your brains out as they did on this bill. This is the lobby's bill. They won, they whipped you. Where are all those good new senators who are going to show the way? Where are they? They're not in evidence because they're not thinking. They are sheep. You are sheep. And I'm not going to be among those who make you think that you're something that you're not. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Chambers. Senator Flood, there are no other lights on. You are recognized to close on LB 551.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Chambers gave a nice speech about guilty pleas. He forgot during the rights advisement, each defendant has the right to plead no contest as opposed to pleading guilty. I guess I plead no contest. I fully support this bill. I support the bill as amended and hope you do too. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Flood. Members of the legislature, you have heard the closing on LB 551. The question is, shall LB 551 advance to E&R initial? All those in favor, please signify by voting aye. All those opposed, vote nay. Have all senators voted who wish to? Record, please, Mr. Clerk.
28 ayes, 7 ayes, Mr. President, on the advancement of LB 551.
LB 551 does advance. 551A. The floor is open for discussion. Senator Chambers waives his.
No, Mr. President.
Senator Chambers, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Members of the legislature, this is the A bill. This may be the going away bill. Not tomorrow, but today bill. Y'all thought you were getting out of here at 5 o'clock, didn't you? Y'all don't have plans, do you? You're not going to eat with any lobbyists, are you? You're going to go celebrate because they whipped the stuffings out of you here today? You ought to be ashamed of yourself. I feel so superior sometimes. I just do. You know what? If I was going to do something, I'd tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to roll over and play dead because they met my price. And I'd tell you. But I'm not going to stand up here and be sanctimonious and say, oh, this is going to help the state. This is economic development for everybody. That's not true, and you know it. And I know it. But the difference between me and the rest of you is that I'm not going to roll over and play dead, and I will keep us here for a while. Although a motion to adjourn is a priority motion, and I probably could not make y'all feel sympathetic enough toward me to vote against adjourning, but to just see if we could stay here on the spur of the moment, not till 11:59. That's unreasonable. 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock. Who'll stay with me till 10 o'clock? Thank you. I see a majority. This is the crucial part of the bill. I'd like to ask Senator Ashford a question.
Senator Ashford, will you yield to a question from Senator Chambers?
Yeah. Senator Ashford, I appreciate that enthusiastic response. How much money is appropriated under this A bill?
You know, Senator Chambers, you tell me, because I've lost, I don't have it.
Well, let me ask the speaker then. It's his bill.
I believe it's $1 million. I don't know, Mr.
Will it fund the Lincoln Amendment?
No.
So then you'd have to amend the A bill to accommodate the Lincoln Amendment. Is that right?
That's correct. That's correct.
If the A bill were to be advanced in its present form, it would be a misrepresentation of the status of the underlying bill. Isn't that true?
I believe that's correct, Senator Chambers.
If we left the original bill...
Well, it's not a misrepresentation because it would have to be... It would not include the...
It would be an inaccurate reflection.
It would have to be amended on
bill.
select file. That's correct.
So if we did not add more money to this bill, what is in the underlying bill could not be paid for. Is that true?
I'm sorry, Senator Chambers, was that a question for...
You can answer it if you like.
You would not like that. Senator Ashford?
I just want to answer the question.
Sure.
If I could,
Sure.
Senator Chambers. And there is no A bill reflecting the $1.7 million or what the anticipated revenue would be in as much as the money doesn't come into the general fund. So the actual A bill for either bill would be a minimal amount. I believe it's $50,000, and that would probably not change.
And what is that for?
For administering the fund, I believe.
And it wouldn't cost any more to administer it with the Lincoln Amendment than it would without the amendment.
That's correct. I don't know whether there might be a slight increase, but it would be minimal.
So we don't really need this A bill. What agency is going to administer this bill?
1 minute.
The bill is administered by, I believe it's in the Treasurer's office.
Do you think the Treasurers could absorb the cost?
Department of Revenue. I'm sorry, Senator Chambers.
Excuse me?
Department of Revenue. I'm sorry.
Do you think the Department of Revenue could absorb the cost of this bill if we did not attach an A bill?
Yes.
So then why do we need an A bill?
I believe this is the Department of Revenue. The Revenue Committee amendments reflected a $50,000 A bill, and they would have to tell you what that's for. It's for cost of administration. Would they be able to do it? I assume they would be able to do it.
We know they would be able to do it. This is not going to hire any new employees, is it? Is this going to hire some new employees?
No, it's not, Senator Chambers.
So it's not creating another job in the Revenue Department?
No, it's not.
They're going to have to buy more paper?
Paper would be a big thing, probably.
Time.
$50,000 worth? Thank you, Mr. President.